Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Microdesk webinar series. My name is Laura Guzman. I'm the Marketing Director here at Microdesk. I wanted to welcome you today to our webinar on AutoCAD efficiency, annotative scaling. So for those of you who aren't familiar with us, just a brief intro. Microdesk is an Autodesk Gold, Oracle, and Google partner. We provide technology training and consulting solutions for the AEC industry. We have 12 offices located throughout the East and West Coasts, and our latest office in Chicago as of last week. We have a staff of over 90 consulting and technical specialists on board. So over the course of the next hour, we will aim to help you understand how we build intelligence into the documents we use in the drawing production cycle to leverage efficiencies. So this session, we will review common scenarios with text, dimensioning, and blocks that can streamline your abilities and maximize the tools you have available. And presenting today's session, we have Michael Kirk. He's a Microdesk Solutions Specialist. And here at Microdesk, Michael provides technical support and training for our building engineering and architectural clients. Mike has more than 15 years of experience in architectural design and engineering. And he has experience working within large and multi-office firms, managing CAD and IT systems, developing CAD standards, and delivering training to designers and project managers. So just a few logistics before we begin. In order to minimize any background distractions, you are all on mute for the duration of the session. If you have any questions during the presentation, though, please feel free to type them in the question area in the bottom of your webinar toolbar, down on the right of your screen. Michael will address these, or as many of them as he can, at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, we will provide you with our contact information so you can follow up with us, and we'll be sure to get back to you. So with that, I will now turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Laura. I just want to welcome everyone to our Microdesk webinar on annotative scaling. We're going to be talking about the concept of annotative scaling, ways that it can be used within your AutoCAD environment, and also giving you all the areas where this tool can be of service to you. So we want to first just talk about the concept of annotative scaling. This is based on the fact that objects that are commonly used when you are annotating your drawings can be given a property that's called annotative. This property will allow you to automate the process of scaling these items so that they plot or display at the correct size on the finished product, the paper output. The following objects that are commonly used that can be annotated in your drawings and given that annotative property are text, dimensions, hatches, multileaders, blocks, and attributes. The annotative scaling tool itself is controlled by toggle buttons that display a list of the available annotation scales in your drawing. You'll see these once we get into AutoCAD, that they are located on your status bar at the bottom of your AutoCAD screen. These annotation scales can be edited and added via the scale list command. The scale list edit command, which allows you to rearrange the available scales, create custom scales, and eliminate any of the unneeded scales that may show up in your drawing. The current scale is shown on the status bar and can be changed to ensure you get the desired results within your annotated objects. The annotative scaling works in conjunction with this annotative property so that it can be assigned to text, dimensions, and/or multi-leader styles. Now, the annotative property gets set, and there can be set to the objects or to the overall drawing itself, and it could be set to different objects like your text, your dimensions, and your multi-leader styles. This is going to allow you to control the height, as we see here where it says paper text height. It's actually to control the height of your objects with their relationship to paper space. It's called what's going to be your plotted size. That height is going to automatically be multiplied by the set annotation scale that you're controlling along your status bar, and so this is going to allow it to achieve the height that it needs to achieve in your model space area so that everything looks pretty uniform and when you get to paper space and you start creating your viewports. The text dimensions or multileaders that need to be shown in the viewports of different scales can easily be duplicated once that annotative scale property is assigned to the objects. Each of these duplicate items can be moved once they are placed in your drawings, and once they are assigned to the scales that they need to be assigned to, you have some manipulative abilities so that you can then make your drawing achieve the aesthetic look that you want as you're going through, and so you can manipulate those between the different scale settings. Items that were not annotative when the drawing was created can be made annotative via your properties palette. Dimensions can be made annotative via the Fit tab. The textile chosen for dimensioning inside of your dimensions does not have to be annotative, because you'll have the ability to make it annotative at any point, or use a textile within your dimensions that's already an annotative textile. And we'll see all these once we jump inside of the AutoCAD program. The annotation scale field that you see at the bottom of your screen works with the annotation scale in model space, but it's also going to help you control the annotation scales when you start creating your viewports. When you create your viewports and you create a new viewport, you're going to see the scale of that viewport take the place of what you've seen in model space for your annotation scale. It's then going to show you what the scale of your viewport is when you create it. Then you're going to be able to highlight it, to activate that viewport, and then select the appropriate scale so that all your items are going to be scaled. Then at that point, the items that are assigned to the scale that matches the viewport scale are going to be the only items that you see within that viewport. So now let's take some time and let's jump into the AutoCAD program. Looking at our drawing here, I'm going to zoom into a particular area. And this is where we're going to begin our work. But what we're going to do is go through and start looking at the areas where this annotation field is going to help us out. First thing I want to show you is along the bottom of the screen, the status bar here where we have our toggle buttons. As we scroll over to the right, we'll see the annotation scale. If I left-click on this annotation scale, you'll see the annotation scales that are available to you within your drawing. If we need to edit these or revise these or even add more scales to this, I can do that by going to the custom choice at the bottom of that scale list. And this is going to get me to my edit drawing scales. As you can see, it gives me a list of all the scales that I have in my drawing. If there are any that I know that I'm not going to use, I can just delete them. Let's say I know that I'm not going to create any drawings that are 100:1 scale, so I can just delete those scales. If I know that I'm not going to create any drawings where my scale is going to be 1 1/120th of an inch equals a foot, I can delete that scale. I can also manipulate the scales that I know I'm going to use. Say I know the scales that I'm going to use in my drawing are more likely to be 1/8 inch. I can move those up to the top of the list so that I don't have to navigate through the entire list to get to the scales that I know that I'm most likely to use. I'm going to move a couple of scales up. I'm going to move 1/8 inch. I'm going to move 1/4 inch up. And I'm going to move 1/2 inch up, because maybe I'm going to have some enlarged plans that I want to take advantage of this tool with and show them at 1/2 inch. I'm going to move that down. So these are the scales that I'm going to use. This is my edit scale list. If we go through and we delete scales that we did not mean to delete, I can always hit my reset button, and that's going to bring back all the scales within this drawing. I'm going to select OK and get out of the edit drawing scales. And now we can go look at the areas where this is going to be of help to us. The first place I'm going to go is under my textiles. So under my Annotate tab, I'm going to go to my text panel and left-click on the diagonal pointing arrow in the corner of the title bar of my text panel. and that's going to get me into the Textile Manager. Inside of the Textile Manager, you see I have a list of the textiles that are within my drawing, and also take notice of the fact that a couple of these textiles have a symbol next to them that looks like someone sliced a drawing scale. What this is letting me know that these particular textiles are annotative. What that annotative textile means is that if I go to a textile that isn't annotative, like my standard textile, we'll look at the way the textiles used to be created in the older versions of the program before the advent of this annotative property. There were a couple ways that the textiles were done. You would have created your font name, and when it came down to your height, you would either choose that I don't want a height inside of my text. And then what this does, if you did not assign a height to this textile, whenever you use this textile in your drawing, the program would ask you for the height of the text. And that worked fine when when that was the only way that it could happen, because what you would do is make sure that you are picking a height that goes with the ultimate viewport scale that you're going to be using. The other way of doing it is that I would create a textile for each text height that I would want, and then assign a text height here. Maybe if I was going to do this for 1/4 inch, I would just make sure that I said that this textile is going to be 4.5 inches tall, and what that would do is anytime that I use this textile, that text would be 4.5 inches. The text will not ask me the question. And again, that was an option that worked fine before the advent of the annotative property. Where this became a problem, though, is that when you had multiple viewports of the same area of the drawing that you were going to draw at different scales, what you had to do, and I'm going to cancel out of this and come back into this in a second, what you would have to do is make sure that in your Layer Properties Manager, that you created textiles that worked for every possible, you created layers that worked for every possible textile that you would use. So if I wanted this to be a different text style, I would have to create new layers, and I'm just going to create a couple different layers here. And if I was the text that I wanted to create and the dimensions that I wanted to use that were going to be for a 1/4 inch viewport, I would have to make sure that I had a layer that worked for that. That would be a Annotext -48. So then I knew that the text that I created that was going to go for a 1/4 inch viewport, I would have to put it on this layer. So this would, and then I'm going to do this for the layer below. And rename the layer. And that would be for 1/8 inch text. So you see, I would have to create a different layer for each textile, and then when I went back in, when I was creating text that I knew was going to go on in a 1/4 inch viewport, I would have to put it on this layer. If I knew I was creating text that was going to go in an 1/8 inch viewport, I would have to put it on this layer. Well, the annotative properties eliminates the need for this at all, completely. So I can create just this one text layer that I'm going to use, and I'm going to make that my current layer. And I'm just going to anchor my Layer Properties Manager to the left here. Make that a Annotext my current layer. And now manipulate this by going inside of the textiles and choosing a text that has an annotative property to it. And what you'll see, you'll notice a change in the question once this annotative property gets activated. This question goes from what is the height of my text. So if I choose a textile that I have here that is annotative, and the checkbox is there letting me know that that text is annotative, my question changes to what is the paper text height. This is where I'm letting the program know that regardless of the viewport scale, when this drawing gets plotted out, I want all of my text to measure an 1/8 of an inch high or 3/32 of an inch high, whatever your organizational standard is. This is then going to take this 1/8 of an inch paper text height and multiply it by whatever my annotation scale is to achieve the appropriate height for my text in model space. So let's demonstrate that. So I'm going to make this standard anno my current text style and set that current, and then I can close out of this view dialog box, and I'm going to go and create multi-line text. We're choosing multi-line text even though the same thing would apply if I was doing single line text. But I'm going to choose multi-line text. Create my text box. And when I create my text, and if you'll notice, when it was in my ribbon panels, my context-driven ribbon panels, it tells me what my text height is. And this is my plotted text height. And so when I start creating my text, and I'm just going to create, I'm going to leave auto stacking on just for the time being. And I'm going to zoom in, continue to edit this text. And this is the text that I want. If I select this text, go inside of the properties of that text, the properties are telling me that this text style is the standard anno that we chose, that it is annotative. It tells me what annotative scale it's assigned to, and to see if it matches exactly what's going on in my annotation scale along my status bar. And it tells me what that paper text height is as assigned inside of the text style, but it tells me what that model text height is. Now this text is going to show at any time I create a viewport that's 1/4 inch. Now I can also, let's say that this particular note is going to be seen when I create my 1/2 inch scale viewport also. Maybe I'm going to do a blow up of this tool room and give it a little bit more information. What I can do with this annotative scaling is to select this text and assign it to the text style, the annotation scale that I want to assign it to. And I do that by either right-clicking on the text once I highlight it, go to the Annotative Object Scale, and choose Add Delete Scales. If I choose Add Delete Scales, it's going to tell me what object scale what annotation scale this object is assigned to now. But if I want to assign it to another scale, I can just choose Add, and again, it goes back to my scale list that we were looking at and manipulating before. And you'll see it has the scales that I can assign to it. As you can see, 1/4 inch isn't part of this list because 1/4 inch is what it's already assigned to. I'm going to choose 1/2 inch and assign it there also. So now this particular text item is going to be seen at 1/2 inch scale or 1/4 inch scale. And I select OK. And I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to go down to my annotation scale on the status bar and change this to 1/2 inch scale. Before I actually left-click on this to change that scale, what I want you to notice is that the way we rearranged our scale list in the scale list edit command, you can see that arrangement carries through in this annotation scale. So I'm going to assign this to 1/2 inch. As you can see, my text item changed. Now, if I left-click on this text item now and go into the properties, it tells me what annotation scale it was assigned to. Paper text height's still the same, but the model text height has changed because it coincides with what's going on at my annotation scale. So that's going to allow me that's going to save me the trouble of taking 2 steps that initially, that's going to slow you down. One, using the Layer Properties Manager to assign this to a different layer. And also, if I have to copy this, I would have to change the text style. I would have to go in and change the text style to that other text style to achieve what I want for this 1/2 inch scale viewport. So I'll go in and I'll go back to 1/4 inch scale. This assigning of my text items to different scale factors, annotation scales, can be done how we did it this time by right-clicking, going to Annotative Object Scale. But it can also be done by highlighting the text, going into the Properties palette, clicking on the Annotative Scale field, and then clicking this Browse button that shows up. It gets you back to that same area. So either way is going to allow you to assign that object to scales, to different annotation scales. And that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to want to assign your objects to these annotation scales, which brings me to a couple of the icons that I want to show you, explain to you what they do, and then explain to you why most of the time you may not want those icons activated. Next to my annotation scale field are two icons. One is for annotation visibility, and the second is for automatically scaling items. Once you assign an object and give an object an annotative property, that gives you the ability to assign it to any of the scales that you see fit inside of your drawing. What these two icons do is that the second icon will automatically scale any of the annotative objects in your drawing, which means anything in your drawing that you've given an annotative property to will automatically duplicate itself whenever you change your annotation scale. And that may be undesirable to you because you don't want every one of your notes to show up in every viewport for every annotation scale that you create. So that's the reason why that icon would be off. That first icon would be off based on the fact that what this does is that whenever you give an object an annotative property, it wants to show an example of that object. And it's going to show you an example of that object even if the object isn't the current annotation, assigned to the current annotation scale. So this is going to, what this does is that it's going to then show me an example of this object even on an annotation scale that I did not want it to be seen. So that's the reason why this first icon will be off. So now back to our text. So the text that we created, it's showing at 1/4 inch scale. Any other text that I want to create is going to automatically show itself at 1/4 inch scale. I'm just going to create a little text over here in this corner. And again, it automatically shows me that it's 1/8 inch scale plotted height. And I'm just going to call this text, and this is going to be my metal railing. And I want to move this text. And this text is fine where it is. Now, I can also say that this text, I want to see this text, and I'm going to go to the Properties palette and do this time. Go to the Annotative Scale, click on the Browse button, and assign 1/2 inch scale to this text item also. And I select OK. What I'm showing you here is that now if I switch my annotation scale to 1/2 inch, my text is showing up with an annotation scale of 1/2 inch. But its placement may be a little off because it may be too far away from what I actually want to label. If I select this text, I can move the individual text, the individual instances of this text at its assigned scales independent of the other items, the other text items assigned to the different scale factors. What that means is that if I were to select this item and I select it by the grip, I can move this note closer to what I actually want to denote. Same thing with my stud wall note below. I'm going to left click on it. I'm going to left click on the grip to move it, and then move that text item closer to where I want to actually label the item that I want to label and what I want to point to with my leader. Now, when I do this, if I go back to 1/4 inch scale, the item is placed where it was comfortable for me in the 1/4 inch scale, and when I go to 1/2 inch scale, the item is placed where it's comfortable for me for the 1/2 inch scale. These items can be moved independently of themselves, of the other items, as long as I'm moving it by the grip, because the grip is only going to activate the item at the current annotation scale. If I use the move command, it's going to move everything. So I want to make sure that I'm moving it by the grip. But they are still joined with each other, because if I go in and say that, and decide that I want to change this note, and I'm just going to make this 3.5 inch stud wall, and just add a little bit to this note. close the text editor, that now becomes part of the note at both scales. So this is going to allow me to not have to cross-reference and chase notes down. If I change it at one scale, it's going to allow me to change it at another scale. I can also, with the use of the grips, and if I left-click on this note at 1/4 inch, and the fact that I'm using multi-line text comes in handy here, because now if I take this grip and change this from a single line of text to multiple lines of text, it's going to do it in both places. So it's going to allow me to do that. You know, if I use the grips, if I come in and I want to make this now zoom in a little bit here, and I want to make that 3 lines of text, it only does it at this example, and it doesn't do it at the 1/4 inch example. So as long as I'm using the grips, I'm going to have a lot of flexibility as to whether or not it's a single line of text or multiple lines of text. So that's how you're going to be able to use this with use this annotated property with your text. The other thing that you're going to be able to do is, I have text here, and I'm back at 1/4 inch scale. I have text for my room names. If I go into the properties, this text is not annotative. And this text style is standard. If I go back into the text styles, you'll see this text style of standard isn't an annotated text style. Well, and that may be fine. I may not want that standard text style to be an annotated text style, but that doesn't stop me from creating text styles, giving an annotated property to the individual items that I need. So I can go through and select all the text that was not annotated, I'm going to select all the room names and numbers. And I'm going to go ahead and make them all annotated text now. Now all these text items that I have highlighted, the standard text is annotated now. And as I hover over it, you'll see a symbol that shows up, the same symbol that showed up in the text styles. But if I go back to my text styles, the standard text style is an annotated text style, but these individual items are. So this is going to allow me to go through and say, well, for this viewport, for this particular viewport, I'm going to have a 1/4 inch viewport, and for the 1/4 inch viewport, I want to show the room names and the room numbers. I want to show all of those items So for all my room names and numbers, I'm going to show them I'm going to do it for a few of these so we can see the difference. I want to show these, go into the properties, they are annotative, they're assigned to 1/4 inch annotation scale. I'm going to go into the annotative object scale, select add, and I want to show them at 1/2 inch scale also. But for what I want to do for when it becomes an 1/8 inch scale drawing, maybe it's only the room numbers that I want to show at 1/8 inch scale. So I'm going to go back into the annotation scale, and you see it's already assigned to 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, and I'm just going to add 1/8 inch into the mix. So what you'll see is when I change my annotation scale to half-inch, the room names and numbers show. And I'll have the ability to use my grips to adjust them so that they look appropriate at this half-inch scale, independent of how they look at quarter-inch scale. So I can do this as long as I'm using the grips to manipulate them. But when I go to 1/8 inch scale, it's only the room numbers that show up and not the room names. So that's going to give me the ability to completely manipulate my drawing in the way that I see fit. So let's jump into Paperspace and show how this is going to work. First thing I'm going to do is kind of ensure that I'm looking at the right paper size. So I'm just going to quickly go through and adjust this to make sure that I'm looking at the right paper size. And I see that I am. I'm looking at the layout here. So I'm going to create a viewport. I'm going to go to my View tab and create a rectangular viewport. When I create this viewport, it shows the entire plan. When I look down, if I highlight this viewport and I look down at the annotation scale, there is no real scale associated here because what it does, once you create that viewport, it automatically scales the fit and puts everything in here. But if I want to make this viewport and I want to assign this viewport to an 1/8 inch scale viewport, I can just double click on that viewport and assign a scale factor. Once I assign that scale, what you'll see is the only text that's showing in this viewport is the text that was assigned to this annotation scale. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create another viewport. That'll be for a blow-up of this lower area. I want to maneuver my viewport, my objects around, so there's a good chance that I'll still see what's appropriate once I assign the scale to 1/2 inch. Make this viewport a little bit larger. So what you'll see is, as I zoom in, the text, the room numbers, look exactly the same size because the paper text height, the plotted text height that was assigned to this, is going to be uniform. So regardless of the viewport size, the viewport scale, the objects within that viewport, the annotative objects within that viewport, are going to look the same size. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to change this viewport scale to 1/4 inch. You'll get a better illustration of it. Because now we're looking at the same items. So this is looking at my status bar, this is a 1/2 inch scale viewport. This is a 1/4 inch scale viewport, yet the text and everything looks exactly the same size because of what we did with giving the text the annotative property and assigning it to the appropriate scales. And that's what we're after. And it helped because I didn't have to create new layers. I did not have to create different text styles. I'm going to jump back into model space here, and we can discuss how this change can be exacted on our dimension styles also. If I go back to Annotate, and go to my dimensions, and use that same arrow to go into my dimension styles, I can choose a dimension style. We have a dimension style here that is not annotative, and we have our dimension style that is annotative. I'll show you the one that isn't annotative because in the earlier portion, the same way I explained it with the text, if you were creating dimensions that were going to be used at different viewports, you would have to create a dimension style, give it some sort of suffix so that you knew it was for the particular viewport scale you were going to use. If I wanted to modify that, I would go inside of the scale, the dimension style, go to my Fit tab, and then assign the overall scale so that it matched what was going on with that actual dimension style. So any of my other symbology and the parameters that I set for my text will be multiplied by this overall scale factor to achieve the height of my text in model space. Well, we don't have to do that. If I hit OK, we don't have to do that if we're using the annotation scale, the annotated property for our dimensions. If I go inside of Modify, we're still setting those same parameters with setting my arrow sizes to the appropriate size. But then when I go to my Fit tab, I check Annotative, and I don't have to worry about using the overall scale factor, because then it's going to take all those values in the other fields and multiply it by whatever my annotation scale says. When it comes to my text, I assign my text the way that I always did, assign my text. Difference is, if I was using a text style that was not annotative, I would have to tell my dimensions what is going to be the size of my text. But if I choose a text style that was annotative, I don't have to answer that question because I've already set that up inside of the text style when I created it. And then everything else within your dimensions is the same as it's always been. So I select OK, and I'm going to select the standard anno and make that current. And when I close out of this, I can just go through and create my dimensions. So I'm going to go into my dimensions, and I'm just going to create a couple of quick dimensions here. Create those dimensions, and you see they're the same size as what my text items are. Now, if I wanted to go through and I'm going to do the same thing down here at the bottom, create those text items. And now if I go and I want to draw this maybe at this scale, at quarter-inch scale, maybe I don't want to see the individual wall dimensions. So what I can do is go inside of the properties of these individual dimensions, and here it's in a different spot, but it still says it is annotated, and this is the annotated scale that it's assigned to. And I can select my dimensions, select that annotated scale, add another scale factor, annotation scale factor to it. In this case, it's going to be ½ inch. But now I've also stated that I don't want to see them at quarter-inch. So I can delete them, even though this is where they were initially created. I can delete them from the quarter-inch once I have another scale factor within this list. And I can now delete those items from here. And I select OK, and my dimensions are gone from quarter-inch. But if I change my annotation scale to ½ inch, they're back again. Now I want to go back. I want to go back to quarter-inch and assign all of these dimensions to quarter-inch so I get the full string. Go inside the properties and assign all of these to ½ inch. So at quarter-inch, I don't get the wall dimensions, but at ½ inch, I get the room names and numbers, and I get the wall dimensions with all those wall dimensions in the entire string. So these are some of the ways that you can manipulate it. As you can see, it's not done with layers anymore. It's done with the visibility that gets controlled by the annotation scales, as you can see at your status bar. And again, I want to jump back into paper space here so we can see how those dimensions look exactly the same size, even though there are two different annotation scales. So that's another way that you're going to be able to do this. Now, the other thing that this is going to be able to control is if I'm using multi-leaders. Now, we were using, if I just scroll back up to the top of my screen here, we were using MTEX for this, and we haven't attached the leaders to it. But we do have the multi-leader tool that we can use. My multi-leader tool, I can create a multi-leader style. I'm just going to create a new multi-leader style. This multi-leader style continue, and then I'm going to set up this multi-leader style. My arrows are going to be 2 inches. I'm just going to quickly run through and set this up. And make it annotative. Go inside of the content, use my MText, and then again, the same thing applies that applied when we were looking at it, our dimension styles. If I choose a annotative text style, I don't have to give it a text height. If I choose a text style that is an annotative, I have to tell it that height. So either way, I can tell it that height. But in this case, I actually do want to use the standard Anno text style that we've been using up until this point, and give it a landing gap. And now this is my multi-leader style. Can set it current and close out. And now if I put that same note in with my multi-leader, I'm going to turn my snaps off here. Same thing is going to apply with my auto stacking. And close my text editor. The same thing applies. But now I actually have a multi-leader that's attached to it. This is at 1/2 inch. I can then go inside of my properties and assign this to 1/4 inch. The same way we were doing everything else. And now, if I change my annotation scale to 1/4 inch, I'll have to move this note out of the way. Just kind of place it in the same area. That's my multi-leader text, and it's still the same way. I was able to go through and create that multi-leader text item and assign it to whatever annotation scales that I want to assign it to, and then it's going to show up in those individual viewports. Now, when you're going through and you're creating these annotation scales, if you're using this with X references, it can easily kind of pile up in your drawing. If you do not, you want to make sure that you have this checkbox here to hide any of the XREF scales, so that they don't come in with the XREFs as you bring them into your drawing. So you want to make sure that this option is checked, so that you're still, the only thing you're going to see in this list is the scale lists that are native to your drawing, and not the scale lists that come in if you use this, if you're XREFing drawings in that have their own annotation scales within them. The other thing that's going to happen is if I needed to save this down to a version, and now we're getting a little further away from it, but if I needed to save this down to a version like 2007 where we don't actually have an annotative property, if I do save this down and do a save as, what's going to happen is each of these annotation scales are going to become their own layers, where in whatever annotation scale you're set to, like I'm set at 1/4 inch, that becomes, I'm just going to go to that becomes a annotext. Any of the other scale factors in your drawing become a annotext with this suffix that we created at the very beginning. And you're going to do that. If I do a save as this, if I do a save as, I'm going to make sure that I say that I want to maintain visual fidelity. So you want to make sure that you're doing that if you're saving it down to an earlier version, but we're talking about 2007 and before. So your annotation scales, you don't have to create additional layers for your annotation, for your different text items that are going to be seen at different viewport scales because of this annotative property. So this tool is going to be helpful for you with your, whether or not it's blocks, text, dimensions, hatching, or what have you. If I was doing this, when we go in, we want to create blocks, and I choose to create a block, you'll see this annotated property shown on the right-hand side of your block definition. Now, you're generally not going to use that for your regular blocks where it's tables, chairs, because all that's drawn at one-to-one. But it's really for like tags and other annotation items that you're going to use. Like if I wanted to make a room tag out of this, you know, if my room names that are regular text now, then I could go through and create a block with attributes in it, and I would make that annotative. So it does the same thing as our text items that we were doing here. So that pretty much brings us to the end of the demonstration. I'm going to invite Laura back in to, if she was feeling any questions.
Thanks, Michael. All right, folks, if you have any questions, you can enter them into the questions area of the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And at this point, we have one question in there, and it's actually a little bit more related to what they can do after the fact. How can I repeat this webinar? I can actually dive in and answer this one, Mike.
Okay.
So we're recording this session, and if anyone's interested in seeing any of the recordings, either this one or any of other sessions, they're posted up on our website. So we'll be sure to provide you with that link as a follow-up to this webinar. Otherwise, if you want to go up there and look for yourself, you can look under the Resources tab, and there's a link to Multimedia where you'll find a whole bunch of videos, including our webinar recordings. Okay, are there any other questions? You can type them in at this point. All right, we do have one other coming in. A couple more are coming here. So first question is, does it work the same in blocks?
Having annotative, well, you can create your blocks annotatively, and yeah, then once you create that block annotatively and you insert it in your drawing, then yes, you are going in and doing the same thing where you're going to see that field in the properties and be able to go into the annotative object scale and assign different scales to that block. Okay. All right, we've got another one here. Are there still issues with XREF scales slowing down DWGs or corrupting files? There is still that issue. That was when I showed you the hide XREF scales. That's going to prevent some of it. In the earlier versions, 2008, 2009, that tool wasn't there, so Autodesk has a scaleless cleanup utility, and that would work to clean up the scales. That tool actually will allow you to clean up multiple drawings at the same time. Whereas if you use the individually going in and editing the scale list, it's one drawing at a time. But if you find that you have drawings where those scale lists are there, that cleanup scale utility will allow you to do it with multiple drawings. Okay. You kind of answered that question already, but the next one up is, do we still need to use the scale cleanup utility? Sounds like yes. Yeah, there are going to be instances where you have to, yes. Okay. All right, next one. Can you annotate hatch? I think that might be two separate things. You can create hatch and give hatch the annotated property. Yes, you can. If that's what he means, yes. Then you can give your hatch an annotated property. And let me just show you where that is. And if I go back into my drawing and I go into the hatch tool, it'll give you that annotated property on the ribbon panels. Great. All right, we've got a couple more in a few minutes here, so I'll give them to you. It's the next one up is, once I have multiple separated text, how do I bring them back together to stack over the top of each other? If I go through and I select this text and I move this text around and I right-click on it, and I go to Annotative Object Scale, it's Synchronized Multiple Scale Positions. And what that's going to do is whatever your current scale, annotation scale is, the location of that text in your current annotation scale is where everything else is going to move back to.
Okay. Just a couple more questions here for you. What does the scale format 1 to 200 do? For example, the scales with the colons.
They're more engineering scales. That is 1 to 200 feet. 1 inch equal, so that 1 inch will equal 200 feet.
Okay. And
now, as a matter of fact, I'll actually show you that real quick. If I go inside of here and I go to Edit Scale List, as you see, you'll get an explanation of what that is down at the bottom. So I'm just going to scroll down. We don't have a 1 to 200 here, but I'll go to 1 to 100. You'll get the same idea. 1 paper unit equals 100 drawing units. That's the same thing as if I were to scroll to my, the scale factors that we may be a little bit used to. If I go to quarter inch, it's 0.25 a paper unit equals 12 drawing units.
great. Okay. I have one last question here for now. Are attributes annotative scalable as well?
Yes, you can, if you were just putting attributes and it wasn't a part of a block, those attributes could be annotative also. But generally, it's the entire block that's going to be annotative. Whatever block you're creating to use those attributes, yes, those can be annotative also.
Okay.
You're going to get that annotative checkbox there also under attribute definition.
Great. All right, one more question here. Is there a way to clean up a previous drawing, say by freezing all but the notes or dimensions, and then in one step make all the notes or dimensions annotative with the same properties?
You can make them all annotative if I were to go through and select. Let's see, I want to select similar, so it's going to select all my text that's the same style and everything. Then I can go into the properties, and one of the properties is going to be make it annotative. So as long as if you can select them, then the ability to make them annotative is going to be one of those properties. Now you're going to run into if you isolate, like if I were to isolate this and I only wanted to show dimensions, then I would have to do a little bit more isolating to only show dimensions. But if I was only showing what's on this layer, then I can select all of those items and make them all annotative. So there's a couple ways that you can do it. One maybe, there may be 1 or 2 steps, but there are ways that you can select all of your items and then go into the properties and then choose to make them annotative or not. So, but as you can see here, if I select both text and dimensions, like the property, the annotated property isn't really there because it's a couple of different types of items. So you may have to then break them down, and then show those. So it depends on the items that you're selecting, whether or not it's a 1 or 2 step process, but you can blanketly make a bunch of them annotative.
Okay. That looks like all the questions we have at the moment. Folks, if you have any more, feel free to type them in. Oh, one more. We've got time for one more. Does annotative scaling work through multi-view blocks?
Well, it kind of depends on the multi-view block. As I was saying before, your multi-view blocks that are actual objects like tables, chairs, they're going to be one-to-one, so you're not really going to want to make those annotative. But the multi-view blocks that you may be seeing in AutoCAD architecture that are text items, your room tags, a lot of those are already annotative inside of. So it does work for them because a lot of those that you may be running into with AutoCAD architecture are already annotative.
Great. Well, everyone, I thank you for all the great questions today. We had a really interactive audience, which is always great. That's all the questions that we have at this time. So at this point, I just want to say thank you, Michael, for a great presentation, and thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. We hope you found it helpful and educational. If you would like some more information about what you saw today, you can visit our website at www.microdesk.com. And up there, you'll find links to information about other upcoming free webinars and events, classroom training, and other resources, including the webinar recording I told you about earlier. So again, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to email us at webinars@microdesk.com, and we'll be sure to get those over to Michael, who I'm sure would be happy to help answer any additional questions you have. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.